poor boy saves millionaire's daughter and demands the impossible. The crystal chandeliers sparkled above the elegant crowd at the Parker Mansion, where San Francisco's elite gathered to celebrate another billion-dollar merger. But on the third floor, 8-year-old Emma Parker sat alone in her pink princess room, clutching a worn teddy bear and watching the flames creep under her door. Smoke filled her lungs as she tried to scream, but no sound came out. Through tears, she glimpsed her father David on the lawn below, desperately fighting against security guards trying to stop him from running back inside. Then, through the thick smoke emerged Nathan Williams, the 16-year-old kitchen helper. Without hesitation, he wrapped Emma in a wet blanket and carried her through the inferno. As they reached safety, Nathan didn't wait for thanks or reward. He simply handed Emma to her father and disappeared into the night. That moment would change their lives forever, though not in the way anyone expected. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Stories like these take time and dedication to craft, and your support means everything. If you connected with this tale of love and redemption, please subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt narratives that touch the soul. Together, let's share stories that matter. David Parker stood at his office window on the 50th floor, gazing at the San Francisco skyline he now dominated. The reflection staring back at him wasn't the same dirty-faced orphan who once slept in doorways, but sometimes late at night, that scared little boy still haunted him. 30 years ago, David had nothing but a cardboard box for shelter and newspapers for warmth. His parents died in a car crash when he was 6, leaving him to bounce between foster homes where he learned early that love was conditional and trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. His only ally was his older brother Michael, who worked 3 jobs to keep them together until that fatal night at the convenience store where he died protecting David from armed robbers. The loss of Michael hardened something in David's heart. He channeled his grief into relentless ambition, working through high school and earning a scholarship to Stanford. While other students partied, David studied. While they dated, he networked. Every sneer, every whispered comment about his shabby clothes, every pitying look fueled his determination to prove them all wrong. By 25, he had founded Parker Investments. By 30, he was making headlines as the wonderkind of Wall Street. Now at 45, David Parker controlled an empire worth billions. The same socialites who once looked down their noses at him now begged for invitations to his parties. The same banks that rejected his loan applications now competed for his business. But success came at a price. His first marriage to Emma's mother, Catherine, crumbled under the weight of his obsession with work. She left when Emma was 3, claiming David had replaced his heart with a calculator. The divorce barely registered. He was too busy closing deals to notice his family falling apart. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent his life accumulating wealth to prove he was worthy of love, only to become incapable of giving or receiving it. His relationship with Emma mirrored his own loveless childhood, though instead of material poverty, she suffered from emotional neglect. He gave her everything money could buy: the best schools, the finest clothes, the most expensive toys, but remained as absent as the parents he'd lost so young. The ghost of Michael haunted him most when he looked at Emma. His brother had sacrificed everything to be there for David, while David couldn't even make it to his daughter's school plays. The thought of Michael's disappointment in him was almost unbearable. But business was business, he told himself. He was doing this for Emma's future, wasn't he? So she would never know the poverty and shame he had endured. Yet standing in his luxury penthouse office, surrounded by the trappings of success, David Parker felt the same gnawing emptiness he'd known as that orphaned boy. All the wealth in the world couldn't fill the void left by Michael's death or ease the guilt of failing Emma. He had everything he'd ever wanted, but somewhere along the way he'd lost everything that mattered. His eyes fell on a framed photo on his desk, Emma, at her last birthday party, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she posed next to the expensive gifts he'd ordered his assistant to buy. She looked so much like Catherine, but there was something else in her expression, a loneliness he recognized from his own childhood photos. The boy who once had nothing had become a man who had everything, Except the one thing his brother had taught him mattered most: the ability to love unconditionally. But acknowledging this truth was one thing, knowing how to change it was another matter entirely. Some nights, like tonight, David wondered if it was too late to learn. In the vast halls of the Parker mansion, Emma's small footsteps echoed like whispers in a cathedral. At 8 years old, she had mastered the art of being invisible, moving through the house like a ghost among the marble statues and priceless paintings that decorated her gilded cage. Her bedroom was a child's dream, a princess suite larger than most apartments, filled with toys that would make other children envious. Designer dolls sat perfectly arranged on custom shelves, their pristine faces never touched by play. A closet full of party dresses hung unworn, waiting for occasions that never came. In one corner, a baby grand piano collected dust despite years of private lessons. But Emma's most precious possessions were hidden under her bed in a shoebox: crumpled birthday cards she'd written to her father but never dared to give, photos cut from magazines of families doing normal things, and a worn teddy bear that had belonged to her mother. Sometimes at night she would take out these treasures and create stories about a different life, one where her father's love couldn't be measured in dollar amounts. The household staff treated her with careful kindness, but always maintained their professional distance. Her nanny, Mrs. Thompson, managed her schedule with military precision: piano lessons on Mondays, French on Tuesdays, etiquette classes on Wednesdays. Every minute was scheduled, every activity designed to create the perfect heiress to the Parker fortune, but no one scheduled time for simply being a child. At school, Emma sat alone during lunch breaks. Other children found her strange, too quiet, too mature, too different. They whispered about her wealth, made up stories about her absent mother, competed for invitations to her elaborate birthday parties. But none of them saw past the Parker name to the lonely little girl underneath. In her diary, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, Emma poured out her true feelings. Pages filled with questions she couldn't ask aloud. Why doesn't Daddy love me? What did I do wrong? Why did Mummy leave? Am I not good enough? Some entries were stained with tears, others filled with desperate plans to make her father notice her perfect grades, flawless recitals, impeccable behavior. The worst days were when she could hear her father's voice downstairs, talking business on his phone as he rushed through the house between meetings. She would run to her doorway, heart pounding, hoping he might stop by. Sometimes he did, offering a distracted pat on the head or a quick "be good for Mrs. Thompson" before disappearing again, leaving only the lingering scent of his expensive cologne. Her mother's occasional visits were no better. Catherine would sweep in like a beautiful storm, full of guilty gifts and empty promises, then vanish again to her new life in Europe. Each time, Emma would stand at the window long after her mother's car had gone, clutching her teddy bear and fighting back tears she'd been taught were unbecoming of a Parker. At night, in her enormous canopy bed, Emma would often dream of the fire that could consume it all: the mansion, the toys, the schedules, everything that stood between her and her father's love. In these dreams, she wasn't afraid of the flames. Sometimes she welcomed them, hoping that maybe in a moment of crisis, her father would finally see her, really see her. The staff whispered about finding her sleepwalking, about the dark circles under her eyes, about her growing silence. They noticed how she barely touched her expertly prepared meals, how she flinched at loud noises, how she seemed to fold into herself more with each passing day. But no one knew what to do. After all, she had everything a child could want except the one thing she desperately needed. In the end, Emma Parker was living proof that loneliness knows no tax bracket, and that all the money in the world cannot purchase the simple warmth of a parent's genuine love. Nathan Williams wiped sweat from his brow as he finished his shift in the Parker mansion's kitchen, his 16-year-old shoulders already carrying the weight of adult responsibilities. His worn sneakers and patched uniform contrasted sharply with the opulent surroundings, but his eyes held a quiet dignity that no amount of poverty could diminish. Every morning, Nathan rose before dawn to help his grandmother Sarah, who had raised him since his parents' death in what everyone called the accident, though he suspected there was more to the story. Their small apartment on the wrong side of San Francisco was cramped but clean, filled with the warmth of Sarah's love and the delicious scents from her tiny kitchen where she baked bread to sell to neighbors. Despite working part-time at the mansion to help pay bills, Nathan maintained perfect grades at the public high school. He stayed up late studying by lamplight, dreaming of a scholarship that could change their lives. His teachers saw his potential, but few knew of his struggles, how he sometimes went hungry to ensure his grandmother had enough to eat, or how he patched the holes in his shoes with cardboard. In the Parker mansion, Nathan moved like a shadow, observing everything while remaining unseen. He noticed Emma's loneliness, recognizing in her eyes the same loss he carried. He saw how the staff tiptoed around David Parker, how wealth had built invisible walls between father and daughter. Sometimes he caught Emma watching him work, perhaps curious about how he could smile despite having so little. There was something hauntingly familiar about Mr. Parker that Nathan couldn't quite place. When the businessman rarely passed through the kitchen, Nathan felt an unexplainable connection, as if they shared some forgotten history. His grandmother would change the subject whenever he mentioned it, her eyes filling with tears she tried to hide. The other kitchen staff admired Nathan's work ethic, but worried about his tendency to give away his lunch to homeless people on his way to school. "You're too much like your father," his grandmother would say, though she never elaborated on what she meant. Nathan had only vague memories of his father's strong hands, a warm laugh, and the lingering sense of safety he'd never felt since. What no one knew was that Nathan spent his free time teaching younger kids in his neighborhood to read and write, sharing the knowledge he fought so hard to gain. In the empty lot behind their apartment building, he had created a makeshift classroom using discarded furniture and donated books. The local children adored him, finding in his quiet strength the guidance many of their own fathers couldn't provide. Each night before bed, Nathan would sit with his grandmother as she said her prayers, her weathered hands holding his as she asked for blessings not for herself, but for all the troubled souls in the world. It was in these moments that Nathan felt closest to understanding what true wealth meant, not the cold marble and crystal of the Parker mansion, but the warm embrace of unconditional love. The acrid smell of smoke still hung in the air as David Parker paced the temporary apartment where they'd relocated after the fire. His Italian leather shoes wore a path in the plush carpet as he watched Emma sleep fitfully on the sofa, her small form twitching with what he feared were nightmares of flames and smoke. The events of the night replayed in his mind like a haunting film reel he couldn't stop. When the fire alarms first blared during his merger celebration, David had felt only annoyance at the interruption. Then came the panicked screams, the thick smoke, and the heart-stopping realization that Emma was somewhere in the inferno above. He could still feel the brutal grip of his security team holding him back as he fought to reach her, could still hear his own voice growing hoarse from screaming her name. Then, like an angel emerging from hell itself, Nathan Williams had appeared through the smoke, carrying Emma wrapped in a wet blanket. The boy's calm determination in the face of death had struck David to his core. There had been something in Nathan's eyes, something hauntingly familiar that David couldn't shake, even now. The insurance investigators had confirmed his worst fears: the fire was no accident. Someone had methodically sabotaged the mansion's electrical system, timing it perfectly with his celebration. The thought that someone would deliberately endanger his daughter made his blood boil, but it also forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth: his pursuit of wealth had created dangerous enemies. The morning after the fire, David had summoned Nathan to his temporary office, prepared to reward the boy's bravery with a substantial check. But what happened next would shake the foundations of everything David thought he understood about wealth and worth. "I don't want your money, Mr. Parker," Nathan had said quietly, standing straight-backed in his singed uniform. "I have a different request." David had raised an eyebrow, pen poised above his checkbook. Name it. Anything. "Spend one day with me," Nathan replied, his voice steady. "Let me show you my world, the way I've seen yours. No phones, no business, no distractions. Just one day to understand a different kind of life." The request had stunned David into silence. In his world, everything had a price tag, every action an angle. But here was this boy who had risked his life to save Emma, asking for nothing but time, the one thing David Parker had never been willing to give. Why David had managed to ask. Nathan's response was simple but devastating, because Emma needs her father to understand what really matters, and I don't think you do anymore. The boy's words had cut through David's carefully constructed defenses like a knife through silk. He had spent years building walls of wealth around himself and Emma, thinking he was protecting her from the poverty he had known. But looking at her now, trembling in her sleep, he realized those same walls had become their prison. What struck him most was how Nathan had phrased his request not as a demand for himself, but as a plea for Emma. The boy who had saved his daughter's life was now trying to save something else, something David hadn't even realized was in danger. The investigation team's report lay unopened on the coffee table, but David couldn't focus on it. Instead, his mind kept returning to the image of Nathan carrying Emma through the flames, asking nothing in return but a chance to show David a world he had spent his entire adult life trying to escape. Emma whimpered in her sleep, and David instinctively moved to comfort her, then stopped, realizing he couldn't remember the last time he had done so. How had he become so distant from his own daughter that it felt foreign to offer her comfort? The thought hit him with the force of a physical blow. Perhaps that was why Nathan's request had shaken him so deeply. The boy had seen what David had become, blind to the growing chasm between father and daughter, the emptiness that no amount of money could fill. In saving Emma from the fire, Nathan had inadvertently held up a mirror to David's soul, and the reflection was terrifying. As dawn broke over the city, David made his decision. He would accept Nathan's request, though the thought of returning to a world he had fought so hard to leave behind filled him with dread. But as he watched Emma's troubled sleep, he realized he was more afraid of losing her than facing his past. The morning after agreeing to Nathan's request, David found himself drawn to Emma's temporary bedroom. Standing in the doorway, he watched his daughter methodically arranging her salvaged possessions: a few singed books, her mother's old teddy bear, and a small wooden box he'd never seen before. Her movements were precise, controlled, like a miniature adult rather than an 8-year-old child. When had she become so serious? He struggled to remember the last time he'd heard her really laugh. Not the polite chuckle she gave at social functions, but the pure, unbridled joy of a child. The realization that he couldn't recall such a moment hit him like a physical blow. Curious about the wooden box, he stepped closer. Emma quickly pushed it under her bed, her face flushing with embarrassment or fear. He wasn't sure which was worse. "It's nothing, Daddy," she said softly, but her eyes told a different story. For the first time, he really looked at those eyes, seeing not just Catherine's color but a depth of sadness no child should possess. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the box. Emma hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. David knelt beside the bed, ignoring how his $1,000 suit pants touched the floor. The box was worn, its hinges slightly rusted. Inside, he found a collection that shattered his heart: unopened birthday cards addressed to Daddy, each one dated and carefully preserved. Years of messages he'd never seen. With trembling hands, he opened the earliest one, dated 3 years ago. Emma's childish handwriting filled the page. "Dear Daddy, I got all A's this term. Mrs. Thompson says you're too busy to come to the school ceremony, but I saved you a seat anyway. Love, Emma." Each card told a similar story: achievements celebrated alone, empty seats at recitals, holidays spent with nannies. "I was going to give them to you," Emma whispered, "but you were always in meetings." Her voice held no accusation, which somehow made it worse. She had accepted his absence as normal, expected even. When had his daughter learned to expect so little from him? Memories flooded back Emma standing in his office doorway late at night, clutching her teddy bear, only to be shooed away by his secretary. Her small face pressed against the window as he left for another business trip. The Christmas morning when she'd unwrapped her presents alone because he had an emergency conference call. He thought of his own childhood, of empty chairs at school events, of birthdays forgotten in foster homes. He had promised himself his child would never know that pain, yet here he was, inflicting a different kind of abandonment. He had given Emma everything money could buy, but withheld the one thing she truly needed: himself. The evidence of his failure lay scattered around the room. Designer clothes with tags still attached, unopened toys, gleaming gadgets, all attempts to buy the love he should have given freely. Each expensive gift a testament to his absence, each price tag a measure of his guilt. "Emma," he began, but found he had no words. How do you apologize for years of emotional neglect? How do you explain to a child that you became everything you once despised? That in trying to protect her from poverty you had starved her of love? She looked at him with those old eyes in her young face, and he saw something that broke him completely: hope. Despite everything, she still hoped he could change. She still wanted his love. The question was, did he remember how to give it? In that moment, David Parker, the man who could close billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, felt utterly helpless before the simple need of his 8-year-old daughter. The walls he'd built, the empire he'd created, the power he'd accumulated, none of it mattered in the face of this fundamental failure. That evening, while Emma slept, David found himself drawn to her room again. The box of birthday cards had awakened something in him, a need to understand the daughter he'd failed for so long. As he stood in the dimly lit room, his eye caught a slight irregularity in the floorboards near her bed. With trembling hands he lifted the loose board, revealing a small leather-bound diary. His conscience warred with his concern reading it would be an invasion of privacy, but the recent fire had awakened fears he couldn't ignore. The first entry stopped his heart. "Dear Diary, today I stood on the balcony railing again. I wondered if anyone would notice if I fell. Mrs. Thompson was on the phone. Daddy was at work. The gardener wasn't looking up. I counted to 10 but stepped down. Maybe tomorrow." The pages that followed documented a descent that no child should experience. Emma had meticulously recorded her loneliness, her pain, her desperate attempts to earn his love. Some pages were warped with dried tears, others filled with drawings of a family she wished she had, simple sketches of father and daughter holding hands, having picnics, doing the ordinary things he'd never made time for. "I tried to be perfect today, got 100% on my French test, played Mozart perfectly at my recital. Daddy's secretary said he was in Shanghai. I cut my arm with scissors behind the piano. Nobody saw." David's hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the diary. He felt physically ill. While he'd been building his empire, his daughter had been silently falling apart. The next entry was even worse. Found Mommy's old pills in the bathroom. Counted them all. Wondered how many it would take. Put them back. Not brave enough yet. Maybe next time it hurts too much. He sank to the floor, his back against her bed, tears flowing freely now. The diary entries spanned 2 years, each one a testament to his failure. Emma had created a ritual of self-harm, hiding her scars beneath expensive dresses he'd never really looked at. She had contemplated suicide multiple times, all while maintaining the perfect facade expected of a Parker. The most recent entry, dated just before the fire, broke him completely. "Sometimes I wish the house would burn down. In my dreams, Daddy runs in to save me, holds me tight, tells me he loves me. But that's silly. The house is too big, too safe. Nothing ever changes here. I'm just a ghost in a golden cage. Maybe that's all I'll ever be." The fire hadn't been just a random accident or even just attempted murder. It had been Emma's desperate wish manifested in the cruelest way. And who had saved her? Not him, her father, but Nathan Williams, a boy who had nothing but understood everything about what really mattered. David closed the diary, his mind reeling. How had he not seen the signs? The quiet withdrawal, the perfect behavior, the desperate need to please, all classic signs of a deeply troubled child. He'd been so focused on protecting her from external threats that he'd become the biggest threat to her well-being. In the soft lamplight, Emma stirred in her sleep, clutching her mother's teddy bear. She looked so small, so vulnerable. The thought that she had stood on that balcony, contemplating an end to her pain, while he sat in boardrooms discussing profit margins, it was unbearable. He had to do something, had to change, had to save his daughter before it was too late. Nathan's request now seemed like a lifeline rather than an obligation. Perhaps understanding a different kind of life, a different kind of love, was exactly what both he and Emma needed. The morning after discovering Emma's diary, David took her to the hospital for a complete physical examination. Her self-harm and suicidal thoughts had terrified him, but what the doctors discovered was even more devastating. What began as a routine checkup spiraled into a battery of tests, each specialist's face more grave than the last. Dr. Sarah Matthews, the chief pediatric specialist, sat them down in her office, its cheerful butterfly decorations a stark contrast to the weight of her words. "Mr. Parker, the blood work revealed some concerning abnormalities. Emma has a rare form of leukemia, one that's particularly aggressive in children." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Emma sat beside him, small fingers tracing patterns on her dress, too used to being spoken about rather than to. David's throat constricted as Dr. Matthews continued explaining treatment options, survival rates, and clinical trials. Words like experimental therapy and limited time floated around him like poison darts. How he managed to croak, "How long have you had symptoms, sweetheart?" Emma's response shattered what remained of his composure. "A while, Daddy. I tried to tell your secretary last month, but you had important meetings in Tokyo." Her voice held no accusation, only a quiet acceptance that broke his heart anew. She had faced this fear alone, just like everything else. Dr. Matthews gently explained that Emma's fatigue, bruising, and paleness signs David had been too busy to notice were classic symptoms. The disease was advanced, having progressed unchecked while he chased deals and built empires. The cruel irony wasn't lost on him. All his wealth, all his power, couldn't buy back the time he'd wasted. "The most promising treatment is available at Stanford," Dr. Matthews explained, "but I must be honest, even with aggressive intervention, the 5-year survival rate is only 30%. David looked at his daughter, really looked at her, seeing now what he'd missed: the shadows under her eyes, the pallor of her skin, the way she seemed to fold into herself like a wilting flower. How many signs had he ignored? How many cries for help had gone unheard? "Money is no object," he declared, his voice hoarse. Whatever it takes, wherever in the world we need to go." "Daddy," Emma interrupted softly, "can you just stay with me through the treatment? That's all I want." Her simple request cut deeper than any business loss ever had. His 8-year-old daughter wasn't asking for experimental treatments in Switzerland or rare medications. She just wanted her father to be present, something he'd failed to do when she was healthy. Dr. Matthews handed them a thick folder of information, her eyes kind but serious. "The next few months will be crucial. Emma needs stability, support, and most importantly, hope. Studies show that emotional well-being plays a significant role in treatment success." As they left the hospital, Emma's small hand in his, David felt the weight of every minute he'd wasted, every bedtime story he hadn't read, every school play he'd missed. The diary entries about suicide seemed even more haunting now had his daughter been crying out for help while simultaneously fighting a battle in her own body. In the car, Emma fell asleep against his shoulder, her face peaceful despite everything. David's mind raced with plans. He would step down as CEO, hand over daily operations, work remotely. Everything he'd spent his life building seemed meaningless compared to the precious weight of his sleeping daughter. His phone buzzed with messages about the fire investigation, merger updates, and board meetings, but for the first time in his career, David Parker let them go unanswered. Instead, he watched his daughter breathe, each rise and fall of her chest, both a gift and a reminder of how fragile life could be. Nathan's request to spend a day understanding a different kind of life now seemed divinely timed. Perhaps there were lessons about living, about love and presence, that he desperately needed to learn, not just for Emma's sake, but for his own survival. While David grappled with Emma's diagnosis, darker forces were moving against him. In a private club overlooking San Francisco Bay, 3 men sat in leather chairs, their faces illuminated by the glow of expensive cigars. Robert Maxwell, James Harrison, and William Stone, former partners turned rivals, had orchestrated the mansion fire, but it was only the beginning of their plan. "The fire failed to break him," Maxwell said, swirling his bourbon. "Parker's even more vulnerable now, spending all his time with that sick kid of his. It's the perfect opportunity." His voice carried the bitterness of a man who'd lost millions to David's superior business acumen years ago. Harrison, a silver-haired venture capitalist, slid a file across the mahogany table. "Our sources confirm he's stepping back from daily operations. The board is already nervous. One more push, gentlemen, and Parker Investments will be ripe for a hostile takeover." The file contained photos: David at the hospital with Emma, Nathan visiting their temporary apartment, medical records stolen from Dr. Matthews' office. They had eyes everywhere, their network of paid informants extending deep into David's inner circle. But Stone, the youngest but most ruthless of the 3, pulled out a laptop. "The press release goes out tomorrow. Anonymous sources revealing Parker's history of fraudulent dealings, accusations of money laundering, hints about his brother's death being more than a robbery gone wrong. By the time he proves it's all lies, his reputation will be in tatters." The plan was meticulous. They would attack on all fronts: personal, professional, and legal. The SEC investigation they'd manufactured would freeze Parker's assets. The fake evidence they'd planted would trigger a board revolt. The leaked medical records would paint David as a neglectful father who'd ignored his daughter's illness. "What about the Williams boy?" Harrison asked, frowning. "He's spending too much time with Parker. Could be a liability." Maxwell smiled coldly. "Already handled. My contacts in the school board are reviewing his scholarship. Seems there might be some irregularities with his application. By next week he'll be too busy fighting to stay in school to worry about Parker." The trio had spent months preparing, watching David build his walls of wealth and success, waiting for the perfect moment to tear them down. The fire was meant to be a warning, but Parker's preoccupation with his daughter had given them an unexpected advantage. But the timing is critical, Stone emphasized, pulling up financial projections. "Parker Investments is on the verge of their biggest merger yet. When this scandal breaks, the stock will plummet. We'll be ready to swoop in, buy controlling interest for pennies on the dollar." Harrison raised his glass in a mock toast. "To David Parker, the orphan boy who thought he could play in the big leagues. By the time we're done, he'll wish he'd stayed in the gutter where he belonged." What they couldn't know, was that their carefully laid plans were about to collide with a truth none of them could have anticipated. A truth that lay in the connection between David Parker and Nathan Williams, waiting to be discovered. As they plotted in their privileged sanctuary, they remained ignorant of another meeting taking place across town. In a small apartment, Nathan's grandmother Sarah clutched a faded photograph, tears streaming down her face. The image showed 2 young brothers, David and Michael Parker, standing with Nathan's father, all 3 wearing military academy uniforms. The past was about to catch up with all of them, but not in the way anyone expected. The very forces trying to destroy David Parker would unwittingly set in motion a chain of events that would reveal long-buried secrets and challenge everything they thought they knew about loyalty, family, and redemption. The truth emerged on a rainy evening when David arrived at Nathan's apartment for their promised day together. Sarah Williams opened the door, took one look at David's face, and dropped the teacup she was holding. The shattering porcelain matched the shattering of decades of carefully maintained secrets. "You look just like him," she whispered, her weathered hand trembling as she touched David's cheek. Just like Michael, the name of his deceased brother on her lips froze David to the spot. Before he could respond, his eyes fell on a framed photograph on the wall, and the world tilted on its axis. There, in faded colors, stood three young men in military academy uniforms, himself, Michael, and between them, a man who could have been Nathan's twin. "That's James Williams," Sarah said softly, "Nathan's father. Your brother's best friend, and his secret protector." The story spilled out like water from a broken dam. James had been more than Michael's friend. He'd been his sworn brother, the third musketeer in their tight-knit group at the military academy. The night Michael died wasn't a simple robbery gone wrong. He'd been protecting David from men sent by their father's old business enemies. James was there that night, Sarah continued, tears flowing freely now. He saw everything. Michael made him promise to protect you, to watch over you from the shadows. He kept that promise until the day he died in what everyone called an accident. Nathan appeared in the doorway, his face a mirror of the young man in the photograph. The resemblance was uncanny, not just to his father, but to Michael as well. All these years, David had been watched over by James Williams, never knowing, while his son Nathan had grown up hearing stories of the Parker brothers. "The fire at your mansion wasn't random," Nathan said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Dad left a letter telling Mom everything. He knew they'd come for you eventually, just like they came for Uncle Michael. That's why I took the job in your kitchen, to keep my father's promise." David sank into a chair, his mind reeling. The boy who had saved Emma, who had asked for nothing but a day of his time, was the son of the man who had secretly protected him for years. Nathan had inherited not just his father's looks, but his sense of duty, his quiet strength, his moral compass. "Your father," David managed to say, "he was there the night Michael died." Sarah nodded, retrieving a sealed envelope from a hidden compartment in an old clock. "James wrote this before he died, addressed to you. He made me promise to keep it safe until the right moment. I think that moment is now." With trembling hands, David opened the letter. His brother's final moments were described in painful detail: how Michael had stepped in front of a bullet meant for David, how he had made James swear to protect his little brother, how James had spent years tracking the men responsible. "There's more," Nathan said quietly. "Dad identified the men behind Michael's death. The same men who tried to destroy you then are moving against you now. He left evidence, names, dates, everything you need to stop them." The pieces fell into place like a cruel puzzle. The fire at the mansion, the business attacks, Emma's medical records being leaked, it was all connected to the past he'd tried so hard to escape. And through it all, Nathan had been there, carrying on his father's legacy of protection. David looked at the boy, no, his nephew in all but blood, with new eyes. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Nathan's response was simple but profound. "You weren't ready to hear it. You needed to remember what really matters first. That's why I asked for that day, not just for Emma, but for you. To help you remember who you were before the money, before the power. To help you remember Michael." In that moment, surrounded by ghosts of the past and revelations of the present, David Parker finally understood. His entire empire had been built on the sacrifices of others: his brother's life, James's dedication, and now Nathan's quiet vigilance. The weight of this truth was both crushing and liberating. The revelation about Nathan's identity and Emma's illness transformed David Parker overnight. Gone was the distant father who ran his household like a corporation. In his place emerged a man desperately trying to rebuild bridges before time ran out. The change began with a simple action: moving Emma's bed into the master bedroom of their temporary apartment. "You don't have to sleep on the couch," Daddy, Emma protested weakly, her small frame already showing signs of the chemotherapy's toll. But David was adamant. "I've missed too many nights of your life already, sweetheart. I'm not missing any more." He spent those nights watching her breathe, counting each rise and fall of her chest like precious gems, wondering how he'd ever thought anything was more important than these moments. The transformation extended beyond their sleeping arrangements. David rescheduled his entire life around Emma's treatment sessions. Board meetings were conducted via phone from hospital waiting rooms. Contracts were reviewed beside her bed during transfusions. The mighty CEO of Parker Investments could now often be found cross-legged on the pediatric ward floor, attempting to learn the card games Emma's fellow patients taught him. During one particularly difficult night, when the side effects left Emma trembling and sick, David held her hair back and told her stories about her Uncle Michael for the first time. "He would have adored you," he said softly, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. "He always wanted a niece to spoil." Emma's eyes lit up despite her discomfort. "Was he like Nathan?" "More than you know, sweetheart. More than I understood until recently." He told her about Michael's sacrifice, about James Williams' protection, about the legacy of love that had watched over them without their knowledge. The other parents in the pediatric oncology ward began to notice the change in the notorious businessman. The designer suits disappeared, replaced by comfortable clothes that could withstand long hospital nights. His commanding voice softened to match the quiet needs of sick children. He learned every nurse's name, remembered their children's birthdays, quietly paid bills for families struggling with medical costs. But the real transformation happened in the small moments. David learned to braid Emma's hair before it fell out from the treatments, his powerful hands becoming gentle as they wove the strands together. He memorized her medication schedule, researched clinical trials, and could discuss her blood counts with the precision he once reserved for market analyses. When Emma's hair finally fell out completely, David shaved his own head in solidarity. "Now we match," he declared, making her giggle for the first time in weeks. He wore his bald head like a badge of honor in board meetings, daring anyone to comment. The night Emma asked him about death tested his newfound strength to its limits. "Are you afraid?" he asked her, heart pounding. She shook her head, wise beyond her years. "Not anymore. I was more scared when I was alone. But I'm not alone now, am I, Daddy?" The simple truth in her words broke him. He held her close, his tears falling into her silk scarf. "Never again, Emma. I promise you'll never be alone again." They developed rituals. Every morning began with what they called pancake parliament, Emma sitting on the kitchen counter while David attempted increasingly elaborate breakfast creations, discussing everything from her treatment options to her dreams for the future. Some of the pancakes were inedible, but the conversations were priceless. During her stronger days, they went on adventurous wheelchair expeditions through the hospital corridors, transformed by David's storytelling into grand explorations. The pediatric ward became an enchanted forest, IV poles turned into magic staffs, and fellow patients became fellow adventurers in their ongoing saga. The other children in the ward gravitated toward them, drawn by the stories and games. Soon David found himself with an extended family of small warriors, each fighting their own battles against various illnesses. He learned their stories, celebrated their victories, and mourned their setbacks as if they were his own. Emma watched this transformation with quiet joy. "You're different now," she observed one evening as he helped her adjust her oxygen tube. "Better different." "I'm trying to be the father you always deserved," he replied, straightening her blanket. She took his hand, her grip weak but determined. "You're not just being a better father to me, you're helping everyone. That's what Uncle Michael would have wanted, isn't it?" Her insight startled him. She was right, his brother had died protecting others, James had lived serving others, and Nathan continued that legacy. Perhaps this was his chance to honor their sacrifice, not through business success, but through genuine human connection. The doctors noticed too. Dr. Matthews pulled him aside during one checkup. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Emma's numbers are improving. It's not just the medicine, it's you. Children respond to love and presence more than we sometimes realize." David looked through the observation window at Emma, who was teaching younger patients how to make paper cranes. "I had to almost lose her to find her," he said softly. "I won't make that mistake again." While David focused on Emma's treatment, Nathan faced his own battles. The scholarship review instigated by Maxwell's cronies threatened everything he'd worked for. His spotless academic record was suddenly under scrutiny, each achievement questioned, every recommendation letter dissected for inconsistencies. The school board meeting felt like a trial. Nathan stood alone before the panel, his grandmother too ill to attend, wearing his only dress shirt freshly ironed but fraying at the cuffs. "We've received information suggesting irregularities in your application." The board chairman announced, not meeting Nathan's eyes, "Your test scores seem unusually high for someone from your background." The implication stung, but Nathan held his ground. "I earned those scores, sir. Every single one. I can take the tests again right now, if you'd like." His voice remained steady, though his hands clenched behind his back. He thought of his father's letter, of the responsibility he carried. A Williams didn't break under pressure. That evening, returning to their small apartment, Nathan found the electricity cut off, another bill sacrificed to pay for his grandmother's medicine. He completed his homework by candlelight, the flame casting shadows on college applications he could no longer afford to send. But he kept writing, kept studying, kept tutoring the neighborhood kids who showed up at his door with hope in their eyes. His grandmother's health deteriorated, the stress of recent events taking its toll. Nathan took on a second job at a local diner, working nights after his shifts at the mansion. He'd catch quick naps during lunch breaks, dark circles forming under his eyes, but his grades never slipped. He couldn't let them. Not with so many younger kids looking up to him. The neighborhood children still came for lessons, now gathering in the parking lot since they couldn't use the apartment's lights. Nathan taught them under street lamps, using the back of discarded newspapers for math problems. "Why do you still help us?" one little girl asked. "You got your own troubles." Nathan smiled, remembering his father's words about responsibility. "Because someone once helped my dad when he needed it. Sometimes the best way to honor help is to pass it on." The pressure mounted when his tutoring spot behind the apartment building was declared off limits by the new property manager. The kids were labeled loiterers, their presence deemed undesirable. Nathan watched them scatter like startled birds, their books clutched to their chests, and felt something break inside him. That night he opened his father's old trunk, searching for inspiration. Among the memorabilia he found photos of 3 young men at military academy, his father, Michael, and David Parker. They looked invincible, unaware of the tragedy ahead. A folded paper fell out his father's acceptance letter to Stanford, never used because he chose to stay and protect the Parker family instead. The discovery lit a fire in Nathan. The next morning he approached the local church, explaining his situation. The elderly pastor, moved by his dedication, offered the basement for tutoring sessions. It wasn't much just folding chairs and wobbly tables, but it was safe, dry, and most importantly, free. Word spread through the neighborhood. More children came, then their parents, then even some grandparents wanting to learn to read. Nathan created a schedule delegating basic lessons to his more advanced students so he could work his extra shifts. The basement became a sanctuary of learning, echoing with the sounds of multiplication tables and grammar rules. But the school board's investigation continued, a sword hanging over his head. His college applications sat in a drawer, the deadlines approaching like thunderclouds. His grandmother's medical bills piled up, and the diner cut back his hours. Everything he'd worked for seemed to be slipping away. Yet Nathan persevered. He took the city bus 2 hours each way to a free SAT prep course, studied medical terminology to better understand his grandmother's conditions, and still made time to help Emma with her homework during his mansion shifts. His father had carried his burden silently for years. Nathan would do the same. One evening, as he swept the church basement after a tutoring session, an elderly woman approached him. She'd been attending his adult literacy classes, finally learning to read at 73. "You're a good boy," she said, pressing a crumpled dollar into his hand. "Like your father was," Nathan tried to refuse, but she insisted. "For the college fund. We're all collecting. $1 here, a quarter there. You're our hope, boy. Don't you give up." The idea for the community center was born in the church basement during one of Nathan's tutoring sessions. David, who had come to observe after learning about Nathan's struggles, stood in the shadows watching the scene unfold. Children of all ages huddled around makeshift tables, elderly adults sounding out words in the corner, and Nathan moving between them all with patient determination. "This is what I wanted you to see," Nathan said quietly, noticing David's presence. "This is what wealth really looks like." The basement was cramped, the furniture mismatched, but the room radiated a warmth that David's mansion had never known. He watched a teenage girl teaching multiplication to younger kids using pebbles as counters. An old man proudly read his first complete sentence, his weathered face beaming with pride. That night, Emma insisted on coming too, despite her weakness from chemotherapy. She sat in her wheelchair helping a young boy with his spelling. Her face glowed with purpose, more alive than David had seen her in weeks. "Daddy," she whispered, "can we make this bigger? Better? These people deserve more than a basement." The next day, David called an emergency board meeting, not to discuss stocks or mergers, but to propose something radical: converting an abandoned warehouse near Nathan's neighborhood into a community learning center. "This isn't charity," he insisted, facing the skeptical board members. "This is investment in human potential." The renovation began immediately. David hired local workers, providing jobs to the community. Nathan's students' parents contributed what they could: painting walls, fixing plumbing, sewing curtains. Every contribution, no matter how small, was honored. The elderly woman who'd given Nathan her $1 insisted on planting flowers by the entrance. Emma threw herself into the project, designing a children's reading corner from her hospital bed. Her doctors noted how the activity seemed to strengthen her, giving her something to fight for beyond her own survival. She spent hours discussing color schemes and book selections with Nathan, their shared vision bringing them closer. The center took shape, becoming something more than just a building. The main floor housed classrooms and a library. The second floor became a job training center, offering computer classes and vocational skills. A small cafe provided work experience for teenagers and cheap, nutritious meals for students. But it wasn't just about education. Nathan insisted on including a community kitchen where families could cook together, teaching traditional recipes and sharing meals. A garden sprouted in the back, tended by elderly residents who taught children about growing food. Every space was designed to foster connection, to build the kind of wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars. The local media caught wind of the story: the millionaire CEO, his sick daughter, and the poor scholarship student building something revolutionary. David faced criticism from business peers who thought he'd lost his mind. "Parker's gone soft," they whispered, "lost his edge." But David had never felt stronger. He watched Emma gain strength, wheeling herself through the center, organizing books and encouraging other sick children to join the programs. He saw Nathan's students flourish, their test scores rising, their horizons expanding. The center became a second home for many, a place where dreams didn't seem quite so impossible. The opening day arrived with little fanfare, just a simple ribbon-cutting ceremony attended by the community. Emma, wearing a headscarf decorated by the children, held the scissors together with Nathan. David stood back, watching his daughter and the boy who had saved her in more ways than one, feeling a profound sense of rightness. "This is what Michael would have wanted," Sarah Williams said softly, standing beside him. "A place where everyone has a chance to grow, to learn, to become more than their circumstances." She squeezed David's hand, years of secrets and sacrifice between them dissolving into shared purpose. The community center's success brought a brief period of joy, but life had other plans. Emma's condition began deteriorating rapidly just weeks after the opening. Dr. Matthews called David into her office one morning, her face grave as she showed him the latest test results. The aggressive treatment wasn't working as hoped, and Emma's body was beginning to fail. "We need to discuss hospice care," Dr. Matthews said gently, but David refused to hear those words. He paced the office like a caged lion, his voice rising. "There must be something else. Experimental treatments, clinical trials, anything." Daddy, Emma's soft voice came from the doorway. She stood there in her pink pajamas, clutching her IV pole, looking smaller than ever. "I want to go to the center." The determination in her eyes silenced both adults. Even as her body weakened, her spirit remained unbroken. Against medical advice, David began bringing Emma to the center daily. He converted one of the classrooms into a private space for her, with a comfortable bed where she could rest while still being part of the life she helped create. The children would visit between lessons, reading to her or showing her their artwork. She became the heart of the place, her quiet courage inspiring everyone who met her. Nathan spent his free hours with her, teaching her advanced mathematics to keep her mind engaged when the pain became too much. They would work on complex problems together, Emma's face lighting up with each solution. "You know," she told him one day between labored breaths, "I'm not afraid anymore. Not of dying anyway. I'm just afraid of leaving before we finish what we started here." The center's students began a ritual. Every morning they would place fresh drawings and notes on Emma's wall, pictures of hope, messages of love, prayers in different languages. The elderly reading students would take turns sitting with her, sharing stories of their lives, wisdom accumulated over decades. Emma absorbed it all, her diminishing physical strength contrasting with her growing spiritual awareness. David watched this transformation with a mixture of awe and agony. His daughter was slipping away, yet touching more lives than he ever had with all his wealth. He stopped going to the office entirely, working from a small desk beside her bed. Board meetings and business deals continued via laptop, but his focus remained on memorizing every detail of Emma's face, every inflection in her voice. One particularly bad night, when the pain medications weren't helping, Emma asked for all her visitors to leave except David. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice thin but clear, "I need you to promise me something." He leaned closer, holding her fragile hand. "Promise you won't let the center die, even if I do. Promise you'll keep helping people, like Uncle Michael would have wanted." David's tears fell onto their clasped hands. "You're not going anywhere, sweetheart. You're going to get better, and we'll run this place together." She smiled weakly. "Just promise me, Daddy, please." Before he could respond, Emma's body began convulsing. The emergency alarm brought medical staff running, and David found himself pushed aside as they worked to stabilize her. The next hours passed in a blur of medical terms and beeping machines. Dr. Matthews emerged from Emma's room looking exhausted. "She's stable for now," she said, "but David, we need to be realistic. The cancer is spreading faster than we anticipated. We're looking at weeks, maybe days." That night, David sat alone in Emma's room, watching her chest rise and fall with each precious breath. The window overlooked the center, where lights still burned as evening classes continued. He could hear the faint sound of children's laughter, adult voices reading carefully aloud, life continuing its relentless flow. In that moment, looking between his dying daughter and the living legacy she'd helped create, David Parker finally understood what real wealth meant. It wasn't in his bank accounts or business empire. It was here, in this room, in every life Emma had touched, in every person who walked through the center's doors carrying dreams of a better future. While David kept vigil at Emma's bedside, Maxwell and his conspirators launched their attack. The morning headlines screamed accusations Parker Empire built on fraud, CEO linked to Brother S murder, charity center a front for money laundering. The carefully orchestrated campaign hit like a tsunami. Parker investment stock plummeted within hours. Board members received anonymous packages containing fabricated evidence of financial misconduct spanning decades. The SEC announced an emergency investigation, freezing company assets. David's phone exploded with calls from panicked investors and angry partners, but he remained at Emma's side, delegating crisis management to his legal team. "You need to address this," his chief counsel insisted, barging into Emma's hospital room. "The board is meeting in an hour to vote on your removal," but David merely adjusted Emma's oxygen mask and replied quietly, "Then let them vote. I'm needed here." Maxwell's group hadn't anticipated this response. They'd expected David to abandon his daughter's bedside to defend his empire, giving them ammunition to paint him as a heartless opportunist. Instead, his unwavering devotion to Emma was turning public opinion. Photos of the gaunt CEO keeping vigil beside his sick daughter began circulating on social media, countering the narrative of a ruthless fraudster. The community center families rallied around him. Hundreds gathered outside Parker Investments headquarters, sharing stories of how David and Emma had changed their lives. Nathan's adult literacy students wrote letters to newspapers, their painfully handwritten accounts of transformation more powerful than any corporate press release. But Maxwell had one final card to play. He released Emma's private medical records, along with doctored documents suggesting David had neglected her condition for years while pursuing business deals. The implied narrative was clear: a father so obsessed with wealth he'd sacrificed his own daughter's health. The attack struck David in his most vulnerable spot. Emma, drifting in and out of consciousness, heard staff discussing the headlines. "Daddy," she whispered, "they're hurting you because of me." David took her fragile hand, his voice firm. "No, sweetheart. They're hurting themselves. Everything I've built means nothing compared to you. Let them take it all." Nathan, however, wasn't content to watch the destruction. Late at night, after Emma fell asleep, he retrieved his father's letters from Sarah's apartment. The documents detailed Maxwell's involvement in Michael Parker's death, along with years of corporate espionage and manipulation. James Williams had collected evidence meticulously, knowing it would be needed someday. Working with David's loyal security team, Nathan began unraveling the conspiracy. They tracked money transfers, recovered deleted emails, and identified the network of paid informants. The evidence painted a damning picture of Maxwell's group's decades-long vendetta against the Parkers. As the net tightened, Maxwell made his final move. He offered David a deal: resign from the company, sign over controlling interest, and the attacks would stop. The offer came with a veiled threat: continued resistance would lead to more revelations about Michael's death. David sat in Emma's room, watching her fight for each breath, while Maxwell waited for his answer in the hospital corridor. The empire he'd built, the wealth he'd accumulated, the power he'd wielded, all of it seemed meaningless now. He thought of Michael's sacrifice, of James Williams' years of silent protection, of Nathan's quiet courage. Through the window, he could see the community center, lights glowing warmly in the evening darkness. Children were still arriving for evening classes, parents heading to job training, elderly students practicing their reading. This, he realized, was his true legacy: not the skyscrapers bearing his name, but the lives being transformed. David walked out to face Maxwell, carrying not surrender documents but copies of James Williams' evidence. "You killed my brother," he said quietly, "tried to destroy my company, and threatened my daughter's memory. Did you really think I wouldn't fight back?" As the business conspiracy unfolded, Nathan faced his own battles. The school board's investigation had escalated into a full-scale witch hunt. His scholarship was suspended pending review, and rumors circulated that his perfect grades were the result of cheating. Even his position at the community center came under scrutiny. "We can't have someone of questionable character teaching our children," a board member declared during a public hearing. Nathan stood before them, dignity intact, despite the humiliation. The same wealthy parents who had praised his tutoring now avoided eye contact, clutching their designer bags closer when he passed. The pressure took its toll at home. His grandmother's health worsened with each piece of bad news. Medical bills mounted as her insurance denied critical treatments. Nathan found her one morning quietly crying over bills she'd hidden from him, and felt his heart break. That afternoon, he tried to pawn his father's military academy ring, the only valuable thing he owned. The pawn shop owner, examining the ring, recognized the inscription. James Williams. Wasn't he the hero who died saving those kids in that building collapse? Nathan learned for the first time how his father had died, still protecting others until the end. He left the shop with the ring still on his finger, pride overcoming desperation. At the center, younger students began disappearing from his classes. Their parents, influenced by the rumors, found excuses to withdraw them. The adult literacy students remained fiercely loyal, but their support couldn't silence the whispers. Nathan overheard two volunteers discussing him. "Such a shame. You never really know someone, do you?" Emma, watching from her makeshift hospital room at the center, saw everything. Despite her weakness, she became his fiercest defender. "Nathan taught me more about courage than all my expensive tutors combined," she told anyone who would listen. Her faith in him never wavered, even as her own strength faded. The final blow came when the local newspaper ran a story questioning Nathan's background. They dug into his father's death, implying connections to criminal activity. Sarah, seeing her son's name dragged through mud, suffered a minor stroke. Nathan spent that night in the hospital corridor, homework spread across his lap, refusing to let circumstances defeat him. But hope came from unexpected places. His former students, the ones he'd tutored in the church basement, began showing up at board meetings. One by one, they testified about Nathan's impact on their lives. A teenage mother spoke about how he'd helped her return to school. An elderly man described learning to read after 60 years of illiteracy. The adult literacy students organized a protest, carrying signs with misspelled words that they proudly corrected, demonstrating their progress. "Nathan Williams taught us more than reading," their spokesperson declared. "He taught us dignity." David, despite his own battles, noticed Nathan's struggles. One evening, he found the boy grading papers by flashlight his grandmother's apartment, dark due to unpaid bills. Without a word, David sat down and began helping grade, two men united by circumstance and something deeper than blood. "Your father would be proud," David said quietly. "Not just of your grades or your teaching, but of how you've handled this with grace. That's the true measure of a man." Nathan looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Sometimes I'm not sure I can keep going. Everyone's waiting for me to fail, to prove them right about people like me." "People like you," David echoed. "You mean people of integrity, of courage, people who put others first? Son, if there were more people like you, this world would be a far better place." That night marked a turning point. The next morning, Nathan walked into his class at the center, head held high, even as more wealthy parents withdrew their children. He focused on those who remained the hungry minds, the determined spirits, the ones who understood that true worth isn't measured by bank accounts or social status. His students, inspired by his resilience, worked harder than ever. Test scores improved dramatically. Adult learners progressed from basic literacy to writing their own stories. The center, despite the controversy, became a symbol of perseverance against prejudice. The crisis came on a quiet Sunday morning. Emma had been teaching a young student to read from her hospital bed at the center when she suddenly gasped, the book falling from her hands. Within seconds, her lips turned blue, her small body convulsing as she fought for air. David, who had been watching proudly from the doorway, felt his world collapse. "Call 911, he roared, rushing to her side. Nathan, working nearby, sprinted to get the emergency oxygen they kept for Emma. The next few minutes stretched like hours as they waited for the ambulance, David cradling his daughter while Nathan monitored her pulse. And at the hospital, Dr. Matthews didn't sugarcoat the situation. "The cancer has spread to her lungs," she explained, her voice heavy. "We need to put her on a ventilator immediately." David watched helplessly as they intubated his little girl, her body looking impossibly small against the white hospital sheets. The next days blurred together in a nightmare of beeping machines and urgent consultations. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, each awakening briefer than the last. David refused to leave her side, sleeping in a chair, his empire crumbling around him forgotten. During one lucid moment, Emma gestured weakly for paper and pen. Her handwriting, once so neat, was almost unrecognizable. "Don't be sad, Daddy. I'm not afraid anymore." The note crumpled in David's hands as he fought back tears. Nathan visited daily after his classes at the center, bringing drawings and letters from students. He would sit quietly, doing his homework or reading to Emma even when she couldn't respond. One evening, he caught David staring blankly at the wall, broken by exhaustion and grief. "Uncle Michael wouldn't want you to give up," Nathan said softly, "and neither would Emma." The words struck David like a physical blow. He looked at his daughter, remembering how she had never given up, how she had fought not just for herself but for others until the very end. Even now, tubes breathing for her, she radiated a strength that humbled him. Dr. Matthews presented one last option, an experimental treatment available in Switzerland. "It's a long shot," she warned, "and insurance won't cover it." The cost was astronomical, more than most people would see in a lifetime. David laughed bitterly at the irony now that he was willing to spend everything on Emma. His assets were frozen in the investigation. That night, something remarkable happened. Word spread through the community center about Emma's condition and the expensive treatment. People began showing up at the hospital: students, parents, the elderly reading group, local shopkeepers. Each brought what they could: crumpled dollar bills, children's piggy banks, jewelry to be pawned. Sarah Williams, despite her own medical bills, brought a mason jar full of coins she'd been saving. "For the girl who gave my grandson hope," she said simply. The adult literacy students organized a fundraiser, proudly writing their first checks. Even the hospital staff started a collection. It wasn't nearly enough for the treatment, but it was something more valuable: a testament to the lives Emma had touched, the community she had helped build. David watched the steady stream of visitors, each bringing their small contribution with enormous dignity, and felt something break and heal inside him simultaneously. Emma stirred that evening, her eyes flickering open. Unable to speak around the breathing tube, she squeezed her father's hand, 3 times their secret code for "I love you." David squeezed back, his voice rough with emotion. "Keep fighting, sweetheart. Just a little longer." As Emma fought for her life, Maxwell's group launched their final attack on the community center. City inspectors suddenly appeared, citing numerous code violations that had mysteriously never been issues before. The local health department questioned the safety of the community kitchen. Anonymous complaints flooded the education board about unauthorized teaching activities. "The center is operating without proper permits," declared a stern-faced city official, posting a closure notice on the front door. "All activities must cease immediately." The timing wasn't coincidental. It came just as evening classes were starting, ensuring maximum public humiliation. Nathan stood on the steps, watching families turn away in confusion. Elderly students who had just learned to read their first sentences clutched their books, tears in their eyes. A young mother with 3 children asked quietly, "Where will we go now?" Her oldest son had just started making progress with his dyslexia. Inside, the staff gathered in the main hall, surrounded by half-finished projects and students' artwork. The adult literacy group's graduation certificates lay unsigned on a desk. College application essays, carefully drafted by hopeful teenagers, remained unfinished. The community kitchen, where families had been learning to cook nutritious meals on a budget, fell silent. Sarah Williams, despite her weakness, came to the center when she heard the news. She made her way to the reading corner Emma had designed, running her hand over the colorful cushions. "This is what they do," she said softly. "When they can't beat you with fair means, they attack what you love." The local media descended like vultures, cameras rolling as students were turned away. Maxwell's paid journalists pushed their narrative the center was a front for money laundering. The education programs were unauthorized. The whole operation was a tax scam. They interviewed concerned citizens, all mysteriously well-dressed and articulate, who questioned the center's true purpose. But then something unexpected happened. The students refused to leave. The adult literacy group set up chairs on the sidewalk, continuing their lessons in the open air. Teenage tutors spread blankets in the parking lot, helping younger kids with homework. The community kitchen moved to Sarah's tiny apartment, feeding as many as they could. A retired teacher who had been volunteering at the center spoke to the cameras, "You can close our building, but you cannot close our hearts or minds." Her voice trembled with emotion as she taught grammar on the street corner, her students huddled around her in the growing cold. Nathan worked tirelessly, coordinating the makeshift classes while fighting the legal battle to reopen. He spent nights poring over building codes and permit requirements, looking for ways to bring the center into compliance. During the day, he shuttled between the hospital and the various outdoor classrooms, keeping Emma updated on their progress. The closure hit hardest at night, when the building stood dark and empty. Through the hospital window, Emma could see it from her bed, the place where she had found her purpose, now silent. The sight seemed to affect her more than any medical setback. Her vital signs would drop whenever she looked at the abandoned center. David, watching his daughter's distress, felt a fury he'd never known. This wasn't just an attack on his business or reputation anymore, it was an assault on everything Emma had lived for. The center had been her legacy, her way of giving meaning to her struggle with cancer. Its closure was like watching her die twice. One evening, as rain forced the outdoor classes to disperse, Nathan found a stack of letters in the center's mailbox. They were from students, parents, and community members, each describing what the center meant to them. One stood out, a crayon drawing from a 6-year-old showing the center with a rainbow above it. The words, carefully printed, read, "Please don't let the bad people win." The board meeting that ended David Parker's reign as CEO took place in the same room where he'd built his empire. The mahogany table where he'd orchestrated billion-dollar deals now felt like an execution block. One by one, board members he'd known for decades voted to remove him, their eyes fixed on tablets displaying the company's plummeting stock price. In light of the SEC investigation and pending criminal charges, the chairman intoned, "We have no choice but to terminate your position." Effective immediately, the words echoed in the silence. Security guards waited outside, ready to escort him from the building he'd built. David sat quietly, fingering the hospital bracelet he still wore from Emma's ward. His phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. Emma's oxygen levels had dropped again. Nothing else mattered. When handed the termination papers, he signed without reading them, surprising everyone who expected a fight. The media chronicled his fall with gleeful detail. "Parker Empire crumbles," screamed the headlines. Business networks ran endless analyses of his downfall. Former associates distanced themselves, rewriting history to minimize their connections. His phone, once buzzing constantly with deals and opportunities, fell silent except for calls from debt collectors. The mansion, already damaged by fire, was seized by creditors. Luxury cars disappeared from the garage. Credit cards were cancelled. Bank accounts were frozen. The wealth he'd accumulated over decades vanished like morning mist, leaving behind only papers marked foreclosure and asset seizure. In his temporary apartment, David sorted through the wreckage of his financial life. Among the papers, he found Emma's first attempt at writing her name. carefully preserved in a gold frame he'd never appreciated. The frame was worth thousands, but the crayon scribble inside was priceless. He placed it carefully in a box marked Keep. Maxwell's group celebrated their victory at their private club, toasting with expensive champagne. They'd succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, not just destroying David's business, but dismantling his entire life. Yet their triumph felt hollow when news leaked that they'd targeted a dying girl's charity project. The final blow came when David's private banking details were leaked to the press. Every extravagant purchase, every luxury indulgence was exposed and dissected. But something unexpected emerged from the scrutiny: records of quiet charitable donations, medical bills paid for employees' families, college funds established for maintenance staff's children. Standing in his stripped, bare office, David found an old photo in his desk drawer. It showed 3 young men at military academy: himself, Michael, and James Williams. They were smiling, arms around each other's shoulders, unaware of the tragedy ahead. He remembered Michael's last words: "Take care of what matters." That evening, David sat beside Emma's hospital bed, holding her hand as machines kept her breathing. The room's window offered a clear view of his former corporate headquarters, its gleaming towers now belonging to others. Emma stirred, her eyes focusing on him with concern. Unable to speak around her breathing tube, she scribbled on her notepad, "Are you okay, Daddy?" Even now, fighting for her life, she worried about him. David looked at his daughter, then at the empire he'd lost, and felt an unexpected sense of peace. "I've never been better, sweetheart," he answered truthfully. "I finally understand what real wealth is." He could rebuild buildings, remake fortunes, but he could never replace another moment with his daughter. The empire he'd lost had given him freedom. He never expected freedom to be simply Emma's father. The truth emerged from an unexpected source. A junior employee at Maxwell's firm, troubled by conscience, anonymously delivered a USB drive to Nathan's grandmother. The drive contained emails, surveillance photos, and detailed plans spanning years, a comprehensive blueprint for David Parker's destruction. Sarah Williams recognized names in the files, the same men who had been involved in Michael Parker's death decades ago. Her hands trembled as she read communications detailing the planned mansion fire, carefully orchestrated to appear accidental. The conspirators had known Emma would be home, calculating that her presence would make the fire appear more believable. Nathan took the evidence to Rachel Thompson, a veteran investigative journalist who had been skeptical of the accusations against David. Together, they spent nights piecing together the conspiracy. The story they uncovered was darker than anyone imagined: a decades-long vendetta born of corporate greed and personal hatred. "You need to see this," Rachel told David, spreading documents across Emma's hospital room table. "The fire wasn't random. They knew your brother died protecting you, so they tried to force you to face the same choice: your business or your child." But the evidence was damning. Maxwell and his associates had orchestrated everything: the fire, the business accusations, even the community center's closure. They had paid inspectors to find violations, bribed officials to revoke permits, and planted false stories in the media. But their biggest mistake was underestimating the power of community. Security cameras at the center had captured late-night meetings between Maxwell's men and city officials. Local shopkeepers came forward with stories of bribes and threats. The adult literacy students recognized men who had pressured them to file false complaints. The smoking gun came from an unexpected source: Maxwell's own secretary. She had kept a detailed diary, recording her boss's increasingly erratic behavior and illegal schemes. When she heard about Emma's worsening condition, she could stay silent no longer. "I have children too," she told the investigators, pushing forward a stack of incriminating documents. What they did to that little girl, using her illness as a weapon against her father, I couldn't live with myself. The evidence painted a picture of calculated cruelty. Maxwell's group had timed their attacks to coincide with Emma's treatment cycles, knowing David would be emotionally vulnerable. They had leaked her medical records specifically to cast doubt on David's character as a father. As Rachel's story went to press, the truth exploded across media channels. The same networks that had gleefully reported David's downfall now raced to expose the conspiracy. Surveillance videos showed Maxwell's men setting up the mansion fire. Bank records revealed payments to false witnesses and corrupt officials. The most damning revelation was an email from Maxwell himself. When the fire starts, Parker will have to choose between saving his daughter or his company. Either way, we win. If he saves the girl, he'll lose the business. If he chooses the business, he'll lose his soul. But Maxwell hadn't counted on Nathan Williams, who had run into that fire without hesitation, embodying the same courage that had driven his father and Michael Parker to protect others at any cost. The story of 3 generations of sacrifice and protection became a powerful counterpoint to Maxwell's calculated cruelty. The morning after the conspiracy was exposed, Emma's vital signs began to strengthen inexplicably. Dr. Matthews rushed in, checking and rechecking the monitors in disbelief. The numbers showed what modern medicine couldn't explain. Emma was fighting back. "It's as if her will to live just exploded," Dr. Matthews explained to David, reviewing the latest test results. "Her immune system is responding in ways we've never seen before. The cancer cells, they're actually retreating." The doctor's voice held a mixture of professional skepticism and wonder. The community center's students had gathered outside Emma's hospital window, holding up signs and drawings. Someone had rigged a small speaker system, and the adult literacy group read their first complete stories to her. Even through the glass, their voices carried messages of hope and love. Emma's recovery defied medical expectations. Each day brought new improvements: stronger breathing, better blood counts, renewed energy. The doctors documented everything, baffled by the speed of her healing. Sometimes, Dr. Matthews admitted, science can't explain the power of love and purpose. Nathan spent hours by her bedside, teaching her the advanced mathematics she'd missed during her illness. Emma's mind remained sharp, her determination stronger than ever. "I have to get better," she told her father. "The center needs us both." The turning point came when Emma was strong enough to sit up and watch a video conference with her students. Seeing their faces, hearing their progress, something sparked in her eyes. That night, her test results showed the most dramatic improvement yet. Within weeks, Emma was asking to visit the center. Against all odds, her cancer had begun to recede. The doctors called it a miracle, but those who knew Emma understood she had found something worth living for, a purpose bigger than herself. The day Emma walked through the center's doors again, supported by David and Nathan, the entire community erupted in celebration. Students who had learned to read during her illness proudly read their stories to her. But the elderly literacy group had written a collective book dedicated to her courage. Dr. Matthews could only shake her head in amazement when reviewing Emma's final scans. "In 30 years of oncology," she said, "I've never seen anything like this. It's as if her body simply decided that cancer had no place in the life she was meant to live." Emma's recovery became a symbol of hope for other young patients. She began visiting the pediatric ward, sharing her story, showing others that sometimes the best medicine isn't found in tubes or bottles, but in having a reason to fight. The full scope of Nathan's influence on the community emerged during the investigation into Maxwell's conspiracy. While reviewing security footage, investigators discovered hundreds of hours of Nathan's quiet acts of service, staying late to help struggling students, sharing his lunch with hungry children, teaching elderly students long after closing time. Local news crews, initially drawn by the scandal, found themselves captivated by a different story. Former students came forward with tales of transformation. A teenage dropout, now headed to college, credited Nathan with saving his life. An elderly woman proudly read her first letter to her grandchildren, tears streaming down her face as she described Nathan's patience. "He never made us feel ashamed," explained Maria Rodriguez, a mother of 3 who had learned English through Nathan's classes. Even when we had nothing to give, he gave everything. She revealed how Nathan had used his grocery money to buy books for students who couldn't afford them. The story deepened when police investigating Maxwell's group uncovered records of Nathan's scholarship battle. His perfect grades hadn't come from privilege or cheating, but from studying between jobs, often going without sleep. The school board members who had questioned his integrity now faced public outrage. Sarah Williams finally shared the letters James had written about the Parker brothers. Through them, a picture emerged of three young men, Michael, James and David, who had sworn to protect and serve others. Nathan, without knowing the full story, had instinctively carried on their legacy. College admissions officers who had received Nathan's applications began calling. Harvard, Yale, Stanford institutions that had initially overlooked him now recognized what they had missed. A student who had maintained perfect grades while working 2 jobs, teaching others, and fighting systemic injustice was exactly what they wanted. But the most powerful testament came from Emma. During her recovery, she revealed how Nathan's daily visits had given her strength to fight. "He taught me that true wealth isn't in what you have," she told reporters, "but in what you give away." He gave everyone hope, even when he had so little himself. The community center's adult students organized a surprise ceremony. One by one, they shared how Nathan had changed their lives. A grandfather read his first book to his grandchild. A former gang member showed off his college acceptance letter. An immigrant family proudly displayed their new small business license. Nathan stood on stage, overwhelmed by the outpouring of love. The same community that Maxwell's group had tried to silence now spoke with a powerful, unified voice, declaring that true value isn't measured in dollars but in lives transformed. The day of reckoning came swiftly for Maxwell and his conspirators. FBI agents swept into their offices at dawn, carrying boxes of evidence accumulated through Nathan and Rachel's investigation. The sight of Maxwell being led out in handcuffs was broadcast live across financial networks that had once celebrated his success. The evidence was overwhelming. Emails detailed not just the recent conspiracy against David, but decades of corporate sabotage and criminal activity. The truth about Michael Parker's death emerged. Maxwell's group had orchestrated the robbery that killed him, fearing his investigation into their illegal activities would expose them. James Williams' meticulous records proved crucial. He had documented everything, creating a paper trail that connected Maxwell's group to countless crimes. The evidence had been his insurance policy, protected by Sarah until the right moment. Even from beyond the grave, James was still protecting the Parkers. The SEC investigation into David's company was not only dropped but reversed. Investigators discovered that the supposed financial irregularities had been fabricated by Maxwell's team. David's business practices were vindicated, his reputation restored. The city officials who had participated in the conspiracy faced their own justice. Those who had accepted bribes to close the community center were publicly exposed. The building inspector who had falsified violations admitted to being paid by Maxwell's group. One by one, the corrupt system that had enabled the attack on David and Emma crumbled. Most satisfying was the revelation of how Maxwell had orchestrated the mansion fire. Security footage showed his hired men disabling safety systems, planning the blaze around Emma's schedule. The public's outrage was immediate and fierce. Attempting to kill a sick child for business revenge crossed every moral line. As Maxwell and his associates faced multiple life sentences, David chose not to gloat. Instead, he focused on rebuilding not just his business, but the community that had supported him through his darkest hours. The same board members who had voted to remove him now begged him to return as CEO. The community center's transformation into a national model happened organically. News coverage of Maxwell's downfall had inadvertently showcased the center's remarkable success. Education experts, intrigued by the test scores coming from this unlikely setting, began visiting to study its methods. What they found defied conventional wisdom. The center's unique approach, combining traditional education with community support and real-world skills, produced extraordinary results. Adult literacy students weren't just learning to read, they were starting businesses. The children weren't just passing tests, they were developing leadership skills. The Parker-Williams model, as it came to be known, attracted attention from across the country. Educational foundations offered grants to replicate the program. City officials from other states arrived to study how the center had transformed its community. The waiting list for admission grew exponentially. Emma and Nathan's original vision expanded beyond their wildest dreams. The center added new programs, a technology lab where seniors learned computer skills from teenage mentors, a business incubator helping adult students launch small enterprises, and a healthcare education program inspired by Emma's journey. David used his restored business connections to create a scholarship foundation, ensuring that students like Nathan would never have to choose between education and survival. The program was named the Michael Parker Memorial Scholarship, honoring the uncle who had sacrificed everything to protect his brother. The center's success challenged traditional notions of philanthropy. It wasn't just about writing checks or building facilities, it was about creating genuine connections between people of different backgrounds, ages, and experiences. The elderly taught young people traditional skills while learning modern technology from them. Successful business owners mentored emerging entrepreneurs. But what made the model truly revolutionary was its emphasis on dignity. No one was treated as a charity case, everyone was expected to contribute what they could, whether through teaching, mentoring, or simply sharing their life experiences. This approach created a self-sustaining ecosystem of learning and growth. On the first anniversary of Emma's recovery, the Parker-Williams family gathered at the center for a private celebration. The room filled with people who had become more than friends, they were the family that love and adversity had forged. Emma, now healthy and vibrant, stood between David and Nathan, her father and the boy who had become her brother in all but blood. Sarah Williams sat in a place of honor, the keeper of secrets who had helped justice prevail. Around them gathered the center's students, teachers, and supporters, a living testament to the power of community. David unveiled a new plaque in the entrance hall, bearing 3 names: Michael Parker, James Williams, and Emma Parker. "This is a tribute," he announced, his voice thick with emotion, "to those who taught us what real wealth means. One gave his life to protect, one spent his life watching over us, and one showed us how to truly live." Nathan, recently accepted to Stanford with a full scholarship, shared news that brought tears to many eyes. He would be studying education and business, planning to expand the center's model nationally. But he would remain involved with their original center, promising the adult literacy students that he'd return to see them graduate. Emma's announcement was equally moving. Despite offers from prestigious private schools, she had chosen to continue her education at the local high school while working at the center. "This is where I learned to live," she explained simply. "Now I want to help others find their way." The celebration turned into a spontaneous sharing of stories. Students spoke of transformations, of dreams realized, of barriers broken. The elderly literacy group performed a play they had written themselves, chronicling their journey from shame to pride. Children demonstrated robots they had built in the technology lab, while their parents proudly displayed new business licenses. As evening fell, David found himself standing in the center's garden with Nathan and Emma. Looking at these 2 young people, one who had saved his daughter's life, one who had saved his soul, he finally understood what his brother Michael had died protecting. Not just a life, but the possibility of love, growth, and redemption. "We're an odd family," Emma observed, smiling at her father and Nathan. "The best kind," Nathan replied, "built on choice rather than chance." David pulled them both close, his heart full. From the ashes of tragedy, loss, and betrayal, something beautiful had grown, a family bound not by blood but by love, a legacy built not on wealth but on service. Thank you for joining us for this emotional journey of love, redemption, and the true meaning of wealth. What did this story mean to you? How has it touched your heart? We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to support our team. Every subscription helps us continue creating meaningful narratives that inspire and move hearts. Share this video with your loved ones. Perhaps they too will find hope and inspiration in Emma, David, and Nathan's journey. Your likes and engagement mean the world to us. They fuel our passion to keep telling stories that matter. Together, let's build a community that celebrates the power of love, forgiveness, and human connection. See you in our next story.